My last guest is Congresswoman Debbie Dingell from Michigan. She is the co-chair of the Bipartisan Disabilities Caucus. She is a fierce advocate for equity, inclusion, and accessibility for all. Congresswoman, thanks for joining us.
Good to be here with you. Thanks for doing this.
Absolutely. Well, I first want to, can you talk a little bit about the Disabilities Caucus and why this issue is so important to you?
Well, to tell you the truth, I was very touched. Jim Langevin founded this caucus, who was the first paraplegic to be elected to Congress. And when he decided to retire, he asked me if I would replace him, which was a very significant honor, quite frankly, because there was no louder voice than he for those with disabilities. But I was married to a man that I loved with all my heart and all my soul, who was a vigorous outdoorsman, who in the last few years of his life began to have problems getting around. It was very hard for him. And I suddenly became part of the process of trying to navigate how you get help, how you find people to help you. I realized how broken this system is, how it's impossible to navigate. There were days, I'm supposed to know, I'm luckier than 99 and 9/10 of the people in this country. And there were days that I would pound my head against the wall. I would just be in tears. I would punch so many buttons trying to get through to somebody to get help, and they kept just referring you to somebody else. And it has made me a true advocate. And I don't think you realize how broken the system is until you have had to try to navigate it. And it's made me a very loud spokesperson for this community.
And, you know, along those lines, I think we've all experienced it, especially those who are older like me. And, you know, just when you have to deal with loved ones, you know, caregiving is so exhausting, but it also highlights how important caregivers they are. And what do you think, you know, we policymakers should be doing? Because we've got an aging population, we've got a workforce that's not going to be as large, and these caregivers are not making a lot of money, and that obviously that impacts patients.
So I'm going to start by responding to that with a couple of things that I deeply believe, which is caregiving makes all other work possible. When someone is not worried about those that they love, be it somebody young, be it someone that is older, someone with disabilities. And most people do not realize that right now, 54% of people over 50 are helping to care for someone with a disability. And COVID has really put a great deal of pressure on the system. There are too many caregivers, spouses that are exhausted, can't get any respite care, can't find anybody to help them take care of their loved ones. Now, I have a bill that I introduced with Bob Casey, which is the home-based community care bill, which does more than one thing. One, this current system we have is designed for institutional care. And there are a lot of people that want to stay in their own homes, in their own community settings. Fact of the matter is, it actually can save the system money. We have almost 1 million people that are on waiting lists to be in their own home care system. We also don't pay caregivers enough. I had people, I was lucky I had one woman that's still part of my family, but I needed to hire people to help supplement that. At the end, I was able to take care of him, but if I couldn't be there, John couldn't be alone. And I had people that were working for me that were working 2, 3 jobs and still living below the poverty line. We need to recognize that caregiving is one of the most important jobs we have in our society, and we need to pay people what they're worth. We need to respect caregivers.
So, Congresswoman, caring for your husband, John Dingell, a legend in politics on Capitol Hill, that was an eye-opening situation, because really, unless you go through the process, and I hadn't been through the process until COVID, when my parents were going through some difficulties, you really don't see the flaws in the healthcare system unless it's one of your loved ones.
You don't understand it until you're hands-on. I had friends who would tell me about when one of their parents became sick and the spouse was taking care of them, which is another issue, by the way, that I am working on, is that they had to get rid of all their assets to be able to afford for someone with Alzheimer's or someone with a more serious issue to even be able to get long-term care. Intellectually, I had heard that story, but I didn't really understand it until I had to take care of John. The day after he finished his work, he cast his last vote, the doctors told me that he may have finished his life's work and they thought he might die that weekend. He didn't. He came back, but I had to get physical therapy for him. He had a broken hip. Well, you've got a system that is 90 days and you're up. There's nothing's covered. You don't know how to find the caregiver. You don't know how to get the physical therapy. I would talk to Medicare, and Medicare would say it's private insurance. Private insurance would say it was Medicare. And think about it. I was a congresswoman married to somebody that had been a congressman, and I couldn't get the system to work. And the next 4 years, I met many people. I used to joke with John that taking him to the doctor was as good as having a town hall meeting, because person after person told me their story. And we really do not understand how hard it is in so many different ways of somebody who needs help, either it be a senior or somebody that is disabled. And a second issue is that I'm trying to get this bill permanently reauthorized. We've been able to get it extended, is the spousal impoverishment program. For too long, a spouse of someone who needed long-term care had to have no assets to get care. Medicaid is the largest provider of long-term care in this country.
So, speaking on the healthcare system, it is so crazy that people have to get rid of assets to get healthcare they need. Having a job is tied to healthcare, but that's the system we have now. When you look, though, with people with disabilities and the stats of unemployment, it's just striking and staggering, these numbers. What do you think the business community could do, or the role of public-private partnerships, to improve these devastating numbers?
Well, I think, I would encourage employers to look at hiring people with disabilities. We've made great progress since the first legislation was passed, but we know now that we have a shortage of workers in too many businesses and industry. And there's so many smart, talented people that have a mobility issue or a different kind of disability issues, but they're very capable of a whole lot of different jobs. We need to partner with businesses to make sure that every human being in our country has a productive member of the workforce. And quite frankly, many people with disabilities are a source of incredible workers that will outdo anyone.
What about the stigma of having a disability? Mental health, that's also been a stigma. I think it's helped a little bit through COVID, because people have been more open about their mental health struggles. Mental health can also be a disability. Can you talk a little bit about that stigma and getting rid of it?
We don't traditionally think of mental health issues per se as someone with a disability, but there are many, many that are struggling. And for too long, I'm not old, but I'm seasoned. You just simply didn't talk about it. You couldn't admit that you were depressed or suffering from anxiety. And by the way, I think and believe that a lot of people who suffer from drug addiction or alcoholism are self-treating themselves. They're drinking or taking pills to take that edge off of anxiety or to give them the bump that they need from depression. Mental health is just like a physical illness. We need to remove that stigma. I have, in recent years, talked about my own father, who was an opioid drug addict, and my sister, who committed suicide. I believe both of them had My father was probably bipolar. My sister, not at least bipolar. And nobody talked about it. Nobody would acknowledge that people had a problem. We've got to, and I talk about it because we've got to take the stigma off. We need to be willing to acknowledge that people have issues, are struggling, need a helping hand, need people to be empathetic and compassionate. It should never be something that keeps someone back. We need to be putting far more resources into mental health issues.
As you know, Congresswoman, we're living in very polarizing times, but the Disabilities Caucus is bipartisan. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because while health care and the Affordable Care Act has been a partisan battle, there have been other bills like the 21st Century Cures Act on health care that actually do attract bipartisanship. And I imagine you have so many colleagues on the other side of the aisle who also have gone through what you experienced with your husband and want to get some stuff done.
Each of these experiences is different experiences. Brian Fitzpatrick is my co-chair, and I'm so honored to serve with him. And he's had a brother who suffers from a disability, and he's very open and honest in talking about those experiences. But with all of these issues that we are talking about, there isn't a family that isn't touched by some aspect of this, be it an aging parent, be it with someone that has a physical disability, struggling with depression or mental health, all these issues that you've talked about. And there are a lot of people. Fred Upton, who was one of my dearest friends, who was actually the author of the 21st Century Cures Bill, he worked on that so hard. He brought people together. He invested in answers to so many important research in so many different diseases. So I think when you're talking about the issues that we are talking about, there isn't a family. We don't look at these issues as a Republican issue or a Democratic issue. These are issues that every family in this country and in the world experience in some way.
Now, your legislation, as you mentioned, it's got an impressive number of co-sponsors already in the new year, 74, I just checked. But they're all Democrats or independents, whether that's in the Senate or the House. Angus King, Bernie Sanders, independents are on it. Do you think you can get a Republican backer of that? And what's your strategy for passing this type of bill? Would you attach it to something that's moving later on this year?
So first of all, I'm always somebody who tries to work across the aisle. So I'm talking to a number of my colleagues and asking them to look at it and consider being a co-sponsor. And I'm going to work with my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to determine what's the best way to get this passed, and work with Bob Casey in the Senate. So anybody who knows me knows that I'm someone that talks to everybody, sits down, says, how do we address that? There are needs that need to be met. And we're going to figure out how we get it over the finish line. We came close last year, but the problems are getting worse, not better.
That they are, without a doubt. And, the Congress did pass a while back the Americans with Disability Act. Is Congress going to have to do something else big along those lines to make more progress, or can it be done incrementally? Because in the next 5 to 10 years, you have more people retiring, you're going to have more people with disabilities, and you're going to have potentially a shortage of healthcare workers.
It's not potential, it's already real. I was very struck this fall. Every time I picked up the newspaper, New York Times, Washington Post, newspapers across the country were talking about the crisis in caregiving. So it's here. I'm not somebody that is going to predict now how we're going to get this done. I'm not afraid of incremental steps, and I'm not afraid of a big bill. What we got to do is understand we have a crisis that needs to have us work together to address the solutions. And you are correct. The baby boomers are getting older. They need help, and we've got to do something about it. So I'm focused on, I don't need fireworks. I don't need big. I need to figure out how we're going to get the job done, and that's what I'm focused on.
And a big part, well, at least some people point to, healthcare workers need to get better compensated. I know that Democrats have been pushing for federal minimums as far as minimum wage. Is that something that Democrats are going to keep the pressure on? Divided government's very hard to move anything, but do you think eventually you're going to win that battle?
Well, I do think we should be paying a minimum wage, but for so many of these care workers. You don't understand is they have no benefits. I really, until I've met so many of the care workers over the last few years who have children of their own. They're struggling. They're living below the poverty line and they're working harder than anybody I know. They don't have health care. They're afraid. By the way, I'll give you one of the problems. You've got people who are going, some of the people that worked for me, and it was a problem during COVID, would be going in and out of different homes, different institutions, and became germ spreaders. But they could not, if they were sick, they couldn't take a day off. There was no replacement for that income. Too many of these workers, they have no health insurance. They can't afford to go to the doctor. They can't admit that they're sick. They can't get medicine. And none of them have retirement or pensions or any kind of thing like that. We need to understand how important these people are in our lives on a daily basis. We need to respect a caregiver and what they do for us and pay them a decent wage and give them benefits like all workers deserve.
Congresswoman Debbie Dingell, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And that brings us to the end of our program. A big thank you to Source America and to all of you for watching. For those of you who missed any of the conversations this afternoon, we will have the video from the event up on our website, thehill.com, shortly. I'm Bob Cusack. Have a great rest of your day.